Greetings to all, and welcome to the 13th episode of NatureSpeaks, brought to you by Himalayan Nature. I am your moderator for the session, Aditi from SMCRF, and we have Dr. Tulsi Subedi sir, Director of Himalayan Nature, to provide technical support. Like every week, we are here to talk about another issue in nature, and today it is about bats. Bats play an important role in many environments around the world. Some plants depend partly or wholly on bats to pollinate their flowers or spread their seeds, while other bats also help to control pests by eating insects. They also play important ecological roles as prey and predator, arthropod suppression, seed dispersal, pollination, material and nutrient distribution, and recycling. Bat population appears to be declining, and presumably in response to human-induced environmental stresses like habitat destruction and fragmentation, disturbance to caves, depletion of food resources, overhunting for bushmeat, and persecution, increased use of pesticides and infectious diseases. Most of the existing conservation and research works in Nepal focus on megafauna, and since bats are among the most overlooked in spite of their ecological importance, I think this is an important topic that we need to discuss. So to talk more on this matter and bring more focus on bat research, we have one of the pioneering researchers on bats who has been working on the field of bat research and conservation for more than a decade. Our speaker for this session is Mr. Sanjan Thapa, a dedicated and passionate individual for small mammal research and also a mentor of mine whom I highly look up to. Mr. Thapa is one of the co-founder of Small Mammals Conservation and Research Foundation. Many of you might know it as SMCRF, and has been dedicated to researching and conserving small mammals that are often neglected in comparison to other charismatic species. He is a member of IUCN Small Carnivores Specialist Group, IUCN Otter Specialist Group, and also the commission member of IUCN Small Mammal Specialist Group. He has also been involved in projects on habitat and acoustic survey of bats in Kathmandu Valley, rural livelihoods and climate change adaptation in the Himalayas, functionality study of the north-south linkage in Chitwan Annapurna landscape, development of monitoring protocol, and national survey of pangolins in Nepal. Mr. Thapa has also published books on paikas, rodentia, bats of Nepal, and numerous journals and articles on various small mammals. He is currently doing his PhD in Guangzhou University and is here with us to share more of his knowledge on bats with us today. So, Sanjan, welcome to the NatureSpeaks program.
Namaste, thank you very much, Aditi, for your kind invitation, and it's my privilege to be here.
Thank you, Dai, for being with us today. Before I hand over the session to Sanjan, I'd like to do some general housekeeping. For everyone's information, this session is being recorded and we are also streaming live in Himalayan Nature's Facebook page. If you would like to ask any questions regarding the presentation, please use the chat option, which will be open just before the presentation ends. Sanjan will try to answer as many of your questions as time allows. So over to you, Sanjan.
Here I'm presenting the overall review on the bat research in Nepal, an ideal opportunity. I mean, there are several opportunities in Nepal for the bat research. This is a poster. I mean, this is a drawing of Brian Horton Hodgson, who was an British envoy in Nepal for a long time, since 1822 until 1843. Chiropterology of Nepal is based on the foundation led by P.H. Hodgson. He secured more than 300 specimens of mammals, and among that, some of them were bats during 1822 to 1843. Now, can you guess how many species of bats did he record during his tenure in Nepal, from Nepal? Was it 7, 9, 11, 12. We can't say that because now I'm going to say how many specimens and how many species Hodgson recorded from Nepal. So Hodgson in 1835 for the first time published a journal from the Asiatic Journal of Bengal, in which he reported seven bat species. In the classified corrected catalogue of mammal of Nepal in 1842, he corrected his classified catalogue, and he added 2 more species of bats in that catalogue. In 1847, Gray catalogued 2 more species, adding 2 more species. And okay, some problem. Okay. So Gray in 1847 catalogued 11 species of bats, adding 2 more species than that of the Hodgson 1842, including the Scotophilus fuliginosus, which is now believed to be the Pipistrellus coromandra. Scully in 1887, Scully was just a surgeon in Bengal Army, and he reported specimens of 12 species collected by Hodgson, and in fact it's 13 species collected by Hodgson, and altogether 19 species of bats reported for the first time from Nepal. During 19th century, the foreigners came to Nepal in order to collect the voucher specimens, and most of the research and most of the new records have been reported at that during this century. In the 20th century, since 2000, since 2000, 21st century, the Nepalese university students from the fields of geology, environment science, forestry were engaged in the bat studies for their BSc, bachelor and master's thesis. However, some other researchers and some NGOs and even the freelancers associated with some NGOs as well as the bat friends in IOF, Institute of Forestry Pokhara, they continued the bat research, or the researchers at NGOs continued the bat research as a part of a project. So this is some statistics about the history, which includes the number of total species recorded during different time periods, and also it I will be explaining in brief about the history. So after 1835, 7 species, 2 more species were added in 1842, and after 5 years further, the species added were another 2, and 11 species were there, and Scully added altogether 19 species, a total of 19 species. So in 20th century, altogether the species number increased to 23, and 2 more added by the Fry. But you can see in this graph, the number of species in rises in Frick 1969, and then again it drops down in Mitchell 1978. This is because during the Frick included all other species that was not reported from Nepal until then, but it was reported from Kumaon in the Western Himalaya and Darjeeling and Sikkim in the Eastern Himalaya. Although Mitchell also included some species that can be probably occurring from Nepal, but that hasn't been reported until then. It was reported from Darjeeling and Kumaon. The number drops down to 37 in Mitchell 1978, and then again Bersan Harrison, which presented a remarkable information on the bats of Indian subcontinent, including that of Nepal. and that included all the museum specimens that were collected during 1900 until, and that's contained in different museums all around the world, especially in the British Museum of the Natural History Museum, then the British Museum. Now it's Natural History Museum London, and FMN, that is Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. After the Bates and Harrison included 49 species of bats. Three species were added during the Gebers and the Russian and Hungarian expedition. And then in bats of Nepal, it was again, and in Gemali et al., the status of Nepal mammal red list, the same number of 53 species of bats were included in the checklist. Perth in 2011 reduced the number to 50, taking out the confusing species, conflicting species, and then in my checklist I included 51 species of bats, adding Scotatus dermali during my MSc thesis, which was recorded from my MSc thesis. So if you see in the time duration during 1880s and 1950 to 1960, there were no records and no surveys at all. In 1960 to 1970, the number of species was high enough, and again the total number of species were maximum during the 1990s until now. If you see the new records for the country, we can see that after Hudson, several researchers, geologists, and museum keepers, they collected the specimens from Nepal and recorded more number of species. In this graph, we can see Bates and Harrison collected more number of species. Recorded more number of species based on the museum specimen records. After Hudson in 1835, and Mitchell recorded 4 species. Similarly, Scully recorded 6 species. And then when it comes to Nepalese researchers, we have recorded a single species by me, my colleagues Divya Dahal, and my other colleague Basanta Sharma and their colleagues. If we see in the time frame, in the different time periods, then in 1990s to 2000, in 1990s, there were more number of surveys occurred in Nepal, and more number of new species were recorded. We can see a quite number. It's around 14 species. Okay. So after 2000, Nepalese researchers and Nepalese masters and bachelor students studying the zoology, forestry, and environmental sciences, and some researchers and some freelancers associated with some NGOs and bat friends were involved in bat research. And we can see the most of the studies belongs to the thesis work, and a few, a part for the kind of research were more focused during this 20 years. I'm not interested with the study before 2000, because most of the studies are based on the specimen collection and the taxonomic one. After that, what kind of studies were initiated in Nepal in these 20 years? So we can see the general research, which means the status, diversity, distribution, habitat, and some monitoring included in this general research. A few echolocation studies, mostly a part of the research in conservation projects. Very few climate change impact and behavior, and even just one bat-plant interaction. It's quite amazing. The number of individuals, the principal investigators were mostly male, that composed 70% of the total number of people involved, and female comprise of 30%. Although not bad, but it's not enough. During these 20 years, I was interested to see what was the status of funding and what was the number of studies conducted in each year since 2000 until now. So we can see in 2010 and 2019 there are more number of research, including the surveys. There were about 8 studies in both years, each in both years. I mean, in both years. Yeah, 8. And then I was interested to see what was the status of funding. For the first time in 2019, there was a maximum study that was granted the financial support, especially generally it's small grants. So we can see in the year 2013, 2016, 2018, and 2009, and 2008 too. I mean, there are a few studies had been undertaken. So who supported the bat conservation and bat research in Nepal? Actually, we are doing quite well with bat conservation, but not as well in the field of research. So how the research is going on and who are supporting the bat research in Nepal? So if we see the graph here, only 31 grants, small grants, have been provided for the bat research to the students and some researchers. Most of the studies here, it's 23 species, 23 studies were conducted without any funding. There were no funding available. Mostly these fundings were provided by the Ruford Foundation and Bat Conservation International, and a few projects by the Haryoban and some other international agencies, including the Ludi Conservancy and the Chester Zoo. And SMCRF has been providing the small grants for the thesis to bachelor and master's level master's student, and BCI has been supporting the master's and students' thesis grants in Nepal. We have quite a large opportunity in studying bats in Nepal. There are ample opportunities to study bats in Nepal. One of the reasons is that being a very small country and from the very small area of Kathmandu Valley, 5 species of bats, I mean, including one subspecies, Minipterus fuliginus, Cerebersi fuliginus as one subspecies, including one subspecies, 5 altogether, 4 species and 1 subspecies of bats were recorded from Kathmandu Valley. Being such a very small area, you can just guess how important it is. So Hippocidus armiger, Myotis formosus, the one in this picture is the Hodgson bat, that is Myotis formosus. Myotis muricola, Myotis nepalensis, and Minipterus cerebersi fuliginus, whereas the Myotis sorbai was reported from Sangja district in 1997. A new species new to Nepal, not only new to Nepal, but new to world, as well as endemic species to Nepal. We do have some highest elevation records in Nepal, not only for Nepal, but also for the world highest elevation records. For example, Murina aurata, this was recorded from Mukot Himal, near the Mukot Himal. It's in Dolpa district, and the dead specimen was collected from an elevation of 4,154 meters. And this specimen is contained in the Natural History Museum, London. And this record of the species, Murina aurata, is the first record to Nepal and the highest elevation record of the species in the world. We also have another highest world elevation record. This is specimen of Plecotus homocros, now homocros, sometimes it's Plecotus auditus. It was collected by Madhu Chetri from Chonup VDC then in Mustang district at an elevation of 3,938 meters. This has been published in 2016. During my Sagarmatha zone research and project, we could see a few thousands of fruit bats in the Halesi Mahadev in Khotang district of Nepal. It's in the eastern part of Nepal, and this locality is at the elevation of 1373 meters. So this is the highest elevation record of Euonyctus spelia, the dawn bat in the world. So we have 3 highest elevation records for Nepal, and there are more probabilities we have more highest world record. Of course, we have several species to be discovered, yet to be discovered, and yet to be discovered, recorded new for Nepal, and also there is chance to get new species to science. We have been doing a bit of echolocation survey, the acoustic survey in Nepal, especially in Kathmandu Valley. So we can see from this graph that these are the characteristics of echolocation calls of bat species that were recorded from Kathmandu Valley, and we can see that it can distinctly separate the species, although a few species have very narrow range of the characteristics, but it can be easily, some of the species can be easily separated just without capturing the bats. So it's a very promising cutting edge technique which has been adopted all over the world and also in Nepal, and this can help aid in bat conservation because it helps in non-invasive, because it's a non-invasive technique. So we need not to capture the bat, so it's very good for the bat, for bat. But we can also see that some of the species has a very narrow range. For example, the Rhinolophus affinis and Rhinolophus sinicus has a very narrow range of calls, echolocation calls, and it can be separated just by a very small taxonomy characteristics. So we have been collecting these bat calls during the release of the bats, while releasing the bats in the field, and we have set up the Nepal Bat Call Library at SMCRF, and altogether we have around 25 species reference calls, and we need to put more calls here so that we can continue the bat research without capturing it and adopting the non-invasive technique. That would be very good enough for the bats, and it's a very promising technique for the bat conservation in Nepal. There are some other research area for the bat research in Nepal to explore. We have a very small number of studies regarding the parasites, ectoparasites and endoparasites from Central Department of Zoology. And we do not have any study on bird breeding and some specific phenomenon such as albinism. I hope almost all of us are very aware about bats. Bats play an important role in providing several ecosystem services, such as other species. Bats also is important as a food chain and food web. It supports the pollination. I mean, it provides this ecosystem services such as pollination. It pollinates about 700 flowers all around the world, and it disperses more than 500 species of plants, seeds in the old world. Another ecosystem services provided by bats, the important one is the pest regulation. It controls the agricultural pest population as well as the carnivorous bats devour. They also control the rodents population. So by controlling the agricultural pest, and the bats also devour 1,000 to 2,000 mosquitoes in an hour in different parts of the world. So that has been a research primarily in the United States and in Europe. So they also help in controlling the disease because they devour the different flies and then different agricultural pests such as the beetles and the hoppers, and they also control the population of the sandflies and hence helps in disease control. And they also and it's a very known fact that the droppings of the bats are a very good fertilizer, a good organic fertilizer, because it has a very nice, because its diet is the insects, and it has a very high amount of protein, so the droppings are very good organic fertilizers. And the bats living in the caves under the breeze, and these places and these habitats, caves and breezes, are very famous for ecotourism, especially in the United States and in Europe and in some parts of the African protected areas. So there has been ecotourism started. In Nepal, we don't have such ecotourism, but from the bat cave in Pokhara and in Khotang district, we have the Halesi cave. There we can say just that there are some possibilities of ecotourism in Nepal too, and the ecosystem services provided by the bats accounts for billions of dollars. We have a very few study in the ecosystem services and the bat-plant interaction in Nepal. A study done by Vidya Sharma in 2016 revealed 8 families of plants are pollinated by the Pteropus medius, the flying fox in Nepal, in Pokhara. Similarly, we have some observation of some species, some plants pollinated by the bats, such as the banana, papaya, mango, and some others, even in the wild. And primarily the churi, it's called the Diplocnema butyracea, the Nepalese butter tree. Because the species such as Rosetus lesnorti and Eonictid speria, they pollinate and then they disperse the seeds of this churi plant, I mean the Nepalese butter tree. They visit the flowers and then they feed on the nectars. During their visit to these flowers and these plants, the Chepang community and the Chepang people, they capture the bats by netting, and these captured bats are killed as a bush meat, and they are very delicacy for the Chepang communities. The meat are very delicacy for them. So bats not only helps in pollination but also supports the seed dispersal, because bats generally take away the fruits a little far away, and some far away by the pteropus like the flying foxes, and then the small species like the Cynoperos and the Rosetus, they take the fruits a little far away in their temporary roost, and then they just feed on the flesh of the fruits, and then they disperse the seeds. We have some examples from Sangkhwa Sabha district in the eastern part of Nepal. This is the Eliocarpus tree, the Rudraksha in Nepali, also in Hindi. So these trees, the Cynoperos sphinx and Rosetus, they visit to these trees and then they pluck out the fruit, the ripened fruit, very ripened fruit, and then they drop down the seeds. So down their roost, down their temporary or permanent roost. There has been a study again by Vidya Sharma in 2016 in Pokhara Valley. The flying fox dispersed the seeds of five families of plants, and we have also observed some other species of figs, especially the cluster fig tree, Ficus racemosa, and other figs, and this Rudraksha, even the coffee. You can see the coffee here, and then Tezu and the Bombax guava, etc., are dispersed by the bats in Nepal. But we still have to do some research in this sector. Another important characteristics, important ecosystem services is the pest regulation, and in our study we just have a few studies. Among them, the latest one is from the Santoshi Pakril in 2014. According to this study, the bats in the Mahendra cave of Pokhara and Nagarjun cave of Kathmandu feeds altogether 9 insect orders, and here we can see the remaining parts in their droppings. Similarly, here we can see the remaining parts of the insects in the droppings that were devoured by the bats. in both caves. Bats not only devour the insects, but also the carnivorous bats such as the Lyroderma lyra. Now it's not Megaderma, but Lyroderma lyra. It feeds on the rodents, and rodents are the pest for the stored grains, so they help in pest regulation. We have also some example of applying the bat manure. I will say bat manure and the bat droppings after getting dry in the tea plantation field in the Bahundangi, and it worked well. But we don't know how efficient it is. But we can just assume that because it's high nitrogenous, because the nitrogen composition is high, it will work well. But we can also do some research in this aspect of that research in Nepal. Regarding the distribution, we have altogether, until now, we have altogether 578 records, coordinates of bat records, bat occurrences in Nepal from since 1923. So we can see here, these are the plots plotted in the Nepal's map, and we can see eastern part, a few eastern part and central part is covered, but a few part of these areas in the lowland part of the now province 2 and the western Himalayas are still left a virgin area for the bat research to be done in coming years. I was interested to see the distribution, what is the proportion of distribution records for the bat species. So amongst the 52 species of bats, just 35 species of bats have less than 10 records, 10 coordinates. And 8 species just have more than 20 coordinates. 5 species have just a single coordinate, such as the Hippocetrus fulvus, Myotis blythi, Nyctalus montanus, Scotophilus cooley, Scotus sturmei. They have been reported from just a single site, single locality record. And other species are also recorded from very few sites. So 26 species altogether has less than 5 coordinates each. I was interested to see which species has highest distribution records, and this graph reveals the Xanthus sphinx, Hippocytrus armiger, Ranulaphus affinis, Rosetus lesnoalti, Pteropus giganteus, and Megaderma lyra, Minotrus reversi, Scotophilus heathii. And some species have altogether 80 species have more than 20 records, and amongst them the Xanthus sphinx and Hippocytrus armiger have highest number of records. That means the coordinates, geographical coordinates. So when we plotted the distribution records of five most species having the most distribution records, we can see the graph, and we still have a lot of area to do. And these species are generalist species, and we have yet to focus the forest specialist species and some other species that very sensitive to the climate, weather, weather. So climate change may impact the bats in coming years. So how does the climate change impact the bats? I was very interested to look into that part during my PhD, my ongoing PhD. So when I plotted this the distribution records using the species distribution modeling, especially the Maxent modeling, for the 3 scenarios present, and then RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 for the years 2050 and 2070. It revealed a very interesting result. These all species are generalist species, and these generalist species, among the 5 species, 2 species, Ranulaphus affinis and Ranulaphus Rosetus lesnoalti. These species is projected to, their distribution range is projected to be diminishing and shrinking to a very narrow range in the eastern part of the mid hills and the higher in the Himalayas, in the higher Himalayas until 2017. And also Hippocidus armiger shows a very for the Hippocidus armiger, the distribution range in the present and in 2070 is very quite interesting. Hippocidus armiger is projected, the distribution range of Hippocidus armiger is projected to reach the Trans Himalayas in the western Himalayas. So so Hippocidus armiger population is supposed is projected to transcend to the western Himalayas, to the trans Himalayas of the western Himalayas. So these are the 5 general species. Another important and quite interesting fact to study, the part of the research to study in bats research in Nepal is the seasonal distribution. We can see here in different part of the Kathmandu Valley, in 16 areas of Kathmandu Valley, 16 sites of Kathmandu Valleys, we can see different species in different months, in different season. So it's quite interesting. It's just from the Kathmandu Valley, but it's it will be very nice to study to see the data from Kathmandu throughout Nepal. So more research is necessary. And for the bats distribution, for the bats the preferred distribution season is the month is the November, and followed by the June in Kathmandu Valley. So this is the case from the Kathmandu Valley, and we can do this for the whole part of Nepal. So for more research is necessary for this. There are very few surveys and very few studies related with the population monitoring and behavior study. However, we have a few behavior studies, especially for the terror colonies in Kathmandu and in Nepal, in eastern part of Nepal. And we just have a very few study on the short-term population monitoring. So we are lacking the annual population monitoring, which needs to be started soon, and that is another part of opportunity for the bat study in Nepal. Now the people are very aware about the bats linking to some diseases, to the viruses. Of course, bats are the reservoir for certain several species of viruses, such as including the coronaviruses. So not only coronaviruses, a few years back there was Nipah virus outbreak in Bangladesh, very near to the Nepal eastern border, just 40 kilometers far away from the eastern border. So Nipah virus and there is a colony, terror colony nearby the Nepal India frontier in eastern part of the Nepal, southeastern part of the Nepal. And so just 40 kilometers away, and there are chances of Nipah outbreak in Nepal too. And we need to surveillance the bats and the viruses in Nepal, not only the medical or the medical surveillance, but also we need the bat surveillance for these viruses in Nepal, and which needs a very huge funding and a very huge determination. And we have to start that in coming years. I hope it will start in coming years. So there are several challenges for the bat research in Nepal. Although we are doing good for bat conservation, but we have several challenges for the bat research. Also, we have a few challenges for the bat conservation in Nepal. Actually, the national policies of Nepal neglect the bat conservation as well as the bat research. Neither of species is listed in protected list of the mammals, although according in the DNPWC Act 1973, the protected list they hasn't included any of the species, but now they have tried to include some of the species which has yet to be published. So specifically, therefore, there has been no target for policies for these species, and we don't have any bat action. We don't have any action plan for national action plan for bats yet. Although we have drafted a site-specific level bat action plan for Kathmandu Valley, and which has not which has yet to implement. And then in the forest policies, such as forest and different policies such as forest policies, Nepal National Biodiversity Strategy, Tarai Arc Landscape Strategy Action Plan, and Chal Strategy and Action Plan, there have been although is supporting the bat research in Nepal in recently. So we have very scarce funding and for the bat conservation and bat research. So and even less funding for the bat research in Nepal. Whatever international agencies provide as a small grant, that is actually for the bat conservation issues rather than for the bat research. Although a part of those projects are implemented for the bat research. So because of the scarce funding, everything is connected. Because of the funding, everything is connected, and so that's the reason we have very less number of studies within 20 years time. And among the 54 studies, maybe a little bit more than that, but I have listed 54 studies, and 31 small grants were provided since 2005, and 23 research were conducted without funding. There were no funding. So until 20 years, and within these 20 years, we have just recorded 3 species new to Nepal, not a new to world, but only new to Nepal, and just 3 species. And there are several opportunities to get more species new to Nepal, and maybe there are some probabilities to get new species to science. So we have been doing just a very general research, especially the habitat, the status, diversity, species richness, and then a little bit monitoring. We have started a little bit acoustic, but advanced research, including the genetic analysis and genetic approaches, needs to be prioritized in coming years. And because we have very scarce funding, we have very insufficient equipments. The problem of equipments is that the insufficiency, because the insufficiency of equipments is because of it's very expensive. Although some of the researchers can buy the mistnet, but it's very costly for the students, for the bachelor level student, for the master's level student. A mistnet, this mistnet costs around less than 50 pounds, but it's still more to the university students. And the hard traps, we have just 2 hard traps in Nepal now, and because it's very costly. So the main problem of these equipments are costly, including the acoustic recorders are too costly. It costs around $1,000. And the main problem of these equipments are they are not only costly but also unavailable in Nepal. So we have insufficient equipments for our research, and we also lack several trainings, especially for the taxonomic, especially for the acoustics and other genetic research. So we lack much of the trainings which are provided to the Western, which are provided frequently in the Western part of the world. There are several probabilities of new species, at least new species to Nepal. And several people sent us the picture, the photo of the bats from different parts of the country. During my visit to Langtang National Park, I have photographed these. I have the photographs of these specimens, dried specimens, which were kept in a hotel. And this species could not be identified because the specimen were not well preserved, and we don't have a specimen for most of the species that were sent as the photographs. People sent us the photograph, but we don't have the specimens to identify the species. Though we can identify these species up to the genera, but we can't identify up to the species level. And if we see this photo, this is a probability. There is a probability of new family to Nepal, that is Molosidae family to Nepal. So a new family can be added to the list of bats in Nepal in coming years. The same is here for these species. We have photograph, we have measurements, but we don't have the specimens. And because of the lack of the specimens, we can't identify the species. And there are so many probabilities that these are species are new to Nepal, new records to Nepal. For some bat fauna, especially for some bat fauna like Myotis, Murina, Pipistrellus, Barbastella, Gipsugo, there are several taxonomic conflicts and ongoing, there are several taxonomic conflicts for the Himalayan species. If we had these specimens, we could have resolved these taxonomic conflicts for the Himalayan offering and some large distribution area, and those species which has a very large wide distribution range. Since we lack these specimens, we are still poor with this advancement. And another hurdle and hindrances for the bat research in Nepal especially for the taxonomic part, is that it has a very complex taxonomy and systematics. If we see here, the Pipistrellus species can be identified just based on the morphological characters or from the photographs. For the Pipistrellus to identify, we need to not only the skull, but we also need to prepare the baculum, the penis bone. Just you can see how complex is the taxonomy of Pipistrellus coromandra and Pipistrellus tenuis. If you see here, almost it's nearly the same. Just there is a deep note here in this part of this baculum. That's only differentiate these two species. Apart from the measurement, if we have the two different, apart from the measurement, if we have two adult specimens without the forearm measuring or measurements overlapping with each other. And if we see this, this is the skull prepared of the Scotagus dormeri, and just the incisor, the character of incisor just define the species, the Scotagus dormeri, and this is for the Scotophilus cooley. Apart from this, nowadays we need the genetic sequence for the bat species, for the new records, and for the interesting results. For these interesting records, we need the genetic data, but we lack this because there is not much availability for the genetic resources in Nepal. There is a lack of genetic resources in Nepal. So there are some probabilities of several species of bats new to Nepal, and these are some of the photographs. And there are 9 or more species of bats that's coming on, and that will be a new species that will be added in the coming up checklist. And I hope that checklist will come soon. So I would like to acknowledge all these institutions and the personalities and my colleagues and the people who provided these photographs for presentation, for making this slide. And thank you very much for the Himalayan Nature to providing me the platform to present my research and the overall review of the research in Nepal until now.
Thank you, Sanjan. Indeed, research of bats and their conservation has become even more important now, since the current pandemic crisis has been very closely related to bats. So we hope the research for these mammals gets more attention now. We will get on to the Q&A session. So are you ready for the questions from our audience, Sanjan?
Yes, yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So we have a first question from Shyam Bajimaya, who writes, which species is the most threatened in Nepal?
Thank you very much, Vicky and Sam Bajimaya sir, for the pertinent question. Actually, we have more than, now we have around 60 species of bats in Nepal, although 8 to 9 species are yet to be recorded because we haven't published due to the lack of the genetic data. We have around 60 species of bats from Nepal now. Maybe after a few years it will be listed in a checklist. But the thing is, yeah, okay. So if we say about which species is most vulnerable under the prevalence of the climate change, if we say in case of Nepal, those species which has a very less range, such as the Io, and then Myotis sicarius, these species which has a very less narrow range of distribution and narrow known range of distribution, that are more vulnerable for the uh, bats. That are the more vulnerable bat species in Nepal, such as the Myotis sicarius, which is endemic to Himalayas, and now it's only recorded from Nepal since a long time. And Io, which has a very few records from Nepal, only 2 locality records. So, and I mentioned earlier the only one species, the 5 species which has only one occurrences coordinates. These species, although are a wide-ranging species, but in Nepal they have just a few records. So these species might be, and forest specialist species, not only the generalist, forest specialist species are also under the threats of climate change. Because I showed earlier a slide with my climate change projection, where the generalist species are also under the climate change threat. So when generalist species are under the threat of climate change, then forest specialists and the species with the narrow range is I mean, obviously is under the threat. Although I can't be sure, I prefer to say may be under the threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Dai. Another question is from Karan Sahasar, and he writes, everywhere in Nepal, you get huge accumulations of bat dropping in the bat caves. Is it safe to use this as a manure for agricultural fields?
In the past, thank you very much, Karan sir, for this question. In the past, people, the local communities used to use these bat dropping. They used to collect these bat droppings and apply in the fields, in their agricultural fields, especially for the vegetable crops. But nowadays, this practice is not in practice much, because there is availability of the chemical fertilizers and some organic manures in Nepal. So it's not in the practice now, but it's safe and it's very good organic fertilizer to be used for the agricultural crops. But while handling these droppings, we have to be very careful and use the gloves, and we have to consider the cleanness. So if we consider all these things, then the use of these pesticides, biofertilizers, and these droppings, the bad droppings are very good for the agriculture. Yes.
Okay, thank you. We have Marcus Cotton, who asks, what habitat management initiative is most essential to support bat populations in middle hills around 1100 meters, Shima, Kasta, Nopes forest and farmlands?
Okay, in the mid-hills range of 1100 meters or 1200 meters. If you say 1200 meters, let's say about the Kathmandu Valley, and it's in 1200 and above. And around the mid-hills, the bat species most of the species are found in the caves, in the forest, and within the human settlements. So we are not sure what just a few habitat management plans and the policies can be helpful for that, but we need to develop the protected area corridors. So if we connect this protected area through the corridors, I mean by reforestation, afforestation, and then by securing the population in the caves, by guarding these through the gates, channeling the gates, but the gates should be channeled based on the information what species lives inside the caves. So considering the bat species, because bat species are found in all area, including the forest, human settlements, caves. So different strategies must be implemented for the cave conservation and forest conservation, and especially linking the protected areas through the habitat corridors will be the best and single most prioritized uh, strategy for the bat conservation, not only in the mid-hills but also throughout Nepal.
Another question from Carol Inskip, and she writes, can you explain how climate change is predicted to affect these species distribution that has been that you have shown earlier in your presentation?
Yeah, I already, I think she missed it or something. But I explained that. So if we see these generalist species, for the cyanide sphinx, the cyanide sphinx, the fruit bats, is not much affecting the distribution. Rather, its distribution will increase. I mean, the distribution range will expand for this cyanide sphinx species. For the Hippocidus armiger, which is insectivorous, bat, the range is projected to expand. Another insectivorous and cave roosting. This is also cave roosting bat, and this is also cave roosting bat. The Rhinophyta affinis, the species distribution gets restricted to a very narrow range in the eastern part of Nepal. It's quite interesting, but we can't be sure enough. We need data for a long-term monitoring to be sure about that. And the Rusetus lesnoides, another cave roosting but frugivorous bat. It also the range of this species also contract and restrict in the mid-hills of the eastern part of Nepal. For the Lyroderma lyra, the carnivorous bat, the species is likely to expand, is projected to expand. The distribution range of this species is likely to be expanded, projected to be expanded. I hope that I hope I could answer your question, Carol.
One more question from Hiru Dongwara, and he asks, how many sites have you covered in the far western Nepal in terms of bat research?
We have very few localities records from the western part of Nepal, especially from west from the Dang Valley. We have a few records from the Bankai district. We have very few records from Kanchanpur district, only 2 or 3 distribution records of species such as Lyroderma lyra and Sanjan sphinx. We have a very few location for Hesperornis tickeli, Scotophilus heathii, Pipistrellus species from the Bankai district, and of a record of Sanjan sphinx from the Chisapani area, from Bardia and Kailali district.
We'll take one last question, and that is from Him Sagar sir, and he writes, do you have any idea on time frame by when most of the bat species calls will have been completed?
Because we have more than 25 species of echolocation calls recorded, and we have the species calls, especially after capture while releasing. We have the calls of these species, and just a few species of bat calls passing by, flying away. So maybe it will take a bit longer time. And if we have several fundings for a long, if we have a very, because we have a very limited funding and scarce funding, if we have a lot of funding at once, then of course we can complete this reference call collection within 5 to 10 years.
I'd like to thank all our audiences for providing the questions and making the discussion on bat conservation even more diverse. We've come to the end of the program. So Sanjan, would you like to give any final remarks before we move on to the closing session?
Yeah, thank you very much, Aditi, for my last remark, giving me an opportunity to say something about the bat research in Nepal. That we have very less number of people, still less number of people working on the bats, and we are very limited number of people who haven't. I mean, who haven't been to the for settled in the foreign countries, and we are doing a little bit in Nepal. But we still expect our young generation, our colleagues, to continue the bat research in Nepal because it has several prospects and several opportunities to harness.
Okay, thank you, Sanjan, and thank you for answering the questions from the audience. And to the audience, I'd like to thank for joining us in this 13th session of Nature Speaks series in spite of the technical glitch earlier in the program. Those of you who joined us a bit late, I'd like to let you know that the entire session will be available on Himalayan Nature's YouTube channel and Facebook page, so you can rewatch the entire session in your convenience. We will be back with another interesting series next week, so please do follow the Himalayan Nature's page to find out more about the upcoming series. And with that, for today, on behalf of the team, I would like to thank you all again. I wish everybody a goodbye and namaste.